My First Quilt Show is brought to you by Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Aurifil, perfectly suited for every quilt project. Hovels, cut it close with Hovels. Omnigrid, providing quilters with specialty rulers and accessories for over 30 years. Riley Blake, colorful, playful, and sophisticated fabrics that can't help but bring a smile to your face.
Hi, I'm Sarah Gallegos and you're watching My First Quilt Show. And today we're going to talk about fabric selections. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I walk into a fabric store, I feel like I need to walk around the store about 3 times before I really see everything that's in that store. There are so many different types of fabrics. You can get traditional fabrics, you can do bright, bold, modern, solids, textures, reproduction prints, batiks. I mean, there are so many different types of fabrics, and I love to collect all of them. You're probably gonna find that you have a particular style that speaks to you the most. I tend to go a little bright and bold and modern, whereas some people really love batiks, or some people really love traditional fabrics. Whatever it is that speaks to you when you walk into that store, that's what you should head to. So let's talk a little bit about the different types of fabrics that you might use together when you're working on a project. Now, a lot of times in projects you'll find, especially with modern quilts, people are using a lot of solid fabrics. So you can get every color of the rainbow in a solid print. But it's also nice sometimes when you're working with more of a blank space or a negative space on your quilt. A solid to me sometimes really stands out, which is what you want oftentimes. But if I want it to be a little more subtle, I also like to go toward a fabric that's more of a texture. So I've got the solids up front there, and then right here we've got the same color palettes, except the fabric has a little bit more depth of color, a little bit of a texture to it, which can cause it to blend a little better with a more vast variety of fabrics. And it also kind of gives you a less stark appearance than a solid fabric. So you want to kind of get a feel for what it is that you're looking for in your quilt. Do you want the pieces to really pop? Do you want them to kind of blend together a little bit more? And it'll kind of give you an idea of where to start with those blender or background type fabrics. Now, when you're selecting your fabrics, there are so many different colors, and it's good to kind of audition your color palettes. So here we've got kind of like a little bit brighter than pastels, and you can throw in some extra pinks and see what works and what doesn't. Now, when I add this more bold color, to me it stands out. It sticks out like a sore thumb because the tone is much richer than these softer pastel fabrics. And if you're ever having a difficult time determining what color looks best in your color palette, a couple of different tips that I like to offer is, first of all, you can squint at your fabrics. If you kind of step back and squint, you get a little different perspective of those fabrics, and you can see if any one of them really stands out. Another thing that I'll often do when I'm in a quilt shop is I'll pull out the fabrics that I think that I like and take a picture of it with my smartphone and then look at it in a picture, because a lot of times when you're looking at that picture, it just gives you a little different perspective than with the naked eye, and can help you to determine if you're on the right track with your color selections. So again, you can kind of play with all different color palettes. You can use, like I said, a total pastel color palette. You can go with a quilt that has complementary colors. That's kind of another popular palette. If you think about the color wheel, the colors that are across from each other give you complementary colors, and they tend to be very nice when patched together. You could do more of an analogous color scheme where you've got all different shades of the same color family. That can be a little bit more subtle and give you a really nice look. Or you can always go with fabrics that just have really high contrast, like white and red. And then you're going to make sure that your blocks are really popping when you pick those selections. Now, when you're working with your fabrics, you want to think a little bit about size and scale of the prints as well. So I'll move these guys out of the way. And here we have a little bit more traditional color palette. And this is a 6-yard bundle, so you kind of allow the fabric designer to do the work for you when it comes to picking the fabrics, but it's nice to think about where you're going to use each one of these pieces and how the scale of the fabric is going to affect your piecing. And what I mean by scale is the size of the print in the fabric. So here we have a small scale fabric where I've got little tiny flowers. And on this piece, we have a much larger scale with much bigger flowers. So I like to kind of keep a couple of different sizes of square rulers. And then I know if I'm working with a really tiny block, by the time I take my 1/4-inch seams out of this piece, I'm going to lose a lot of that flower. So for a smaller piece in a quilt, maybe I need to go with a smaller scale fabric. Now, if I were working with larger blocks, this is a 4.5 inch, I can see that I can really center my flowers if I want to fussy cut them or make them the focus of a quilt block. So think about scale and think about color value as you're picking your fabrics. Another favorite way of mine to pick fabric selections is to find one main print that I love, so like this batik fabric here, and then come up with a few other pieces that go well with that print. So it's got a lot of variation of blues and burgundies and off-whites and greens. So in my shop, I literally took that bolt and held it up against some of the other batiks until I found the purple and the green and this kind of yellowy off-white color that really popped against that bold border batik that I used for my borders as well. And I even found a really cool backing fabric that pulled all of those fabrics. So that's another good place to start with selecting a quilt. If you find one focal fabric that you love and then pick a few pieces to go with it, and you can kind of place them and see how they look in the different quilt blocks that you're selecting. Now, another option when it comes to sort of a solid but not would be another texture like this. So here we have these tone-on-tone circles. Some of them are a much higher contrast, like this white with the green and red. Whereas this off-white here, you can barely see the white circles that are in it. So again, it gives you a little bit of dimension, a little bit of depth, a little texture, without being an absolute solid in your quilt. I hope this episode takes a little bit of the fear out of walking into a fabric store and picking fabrics. Don't forget that as long as you love the fabric, you really can't go wrong. You're making something for yourself, do something that you love. Pick a fabric you love and come up with coordinates. And don't be afraid to ask for help. Ask a quilting buddy, ask the local shop owner. They're always happy to help a beginner to pick fabrics and come up with something beautiful. So on our next episode, come back and see me on My First Quilt Show, where we're gonna talk about how to cut fabric.
My First Quilt Show is brought to you by Babylock, for the love of sewing. Aurifil, perfectly suited for every quilt project. Hovels, cut it close with Hovels. Omnigrid, providing quilters with specialty rulers and accessories for over 30 years. Riley Blake, colorful, playful, and sophisticated fabrics that can't help but bring a smile to your face.